You don't want to know something nobody talks about? There's a generation walking around right now, going to work, paying bills, raising kids, handling problems, and they're doing all of it without falling apart. No burnout posts, no trauma dumps on social media, no therapy speak about their inner child. They just handle it. And everyone around them keeps asking, how? How do you go through job losses, divorces, economic collapses, and just keep moving? How do you not crack? How are you not constantly talking about how hard everything is? Generation X doesn't answer that question. They just shrug, maybe crack a dry joke, and get back to work.
But here's what nobody has actually said out loud. What if they're not unbreakable despite their hard childhood? What if they're unbreakable because of it? What if everything that looked like neglect, like absence, like emotional hardness, was actually the most sophisticated psychological training a human being can go through? Because science has a lot to say about this, and what it says will completely change how you see the quietest, toughest, most underestimated generation alive.
Let's go back, way back. It's 1974. A 7-year-old kid in suburban Ohio gets handed a house key on a string. Mom leaves for work at 7 a.m. Dad's already gone. The instruction is simple. Come home, lock the door, don't burn the house down. No cell phone, no way for anyone to check. No neighbor watching through a camera. Just a kid, a key, and 4 hours alone until someone comes home. This wasn't unusual. This was Tuesday. By the early 1980s, researchers estimated that somewhere between 7 and 10 million American children were regularly coming home to empty houses after school. They called them latchkey kids, named after the key they wore around their neck, like a small metal symbol of early independence.
Dr. Emmy Werner, a developmental psychologist at UC Davis, spent over 4 decades studying children who grew up under high-stress, low-support conditions. What she found wasn't what people expected. A significant portion of these children didn't just survive the experience. They developed what Werner called resilience factors, traits like problem-solving under pressure, emotional self-regulation, and an internal locus of control that stayed with them their entire lives. In plain language, the kids who learned to handle things alone learned to handle things. That was Generation X, every single day. Now, here's where it gets interesting. When we talk about childhood difficulty today, we almost always frame it as damage, as something to heal from, as a wound that needs attention and time and maybe a professional. And sometimes that's true. But neuroscience tells a more complicated story.
Research published in the journal Frontiers in Human Neuroscience found that moderate levels of early stress, not extreme trauma, but the kind of low-grade pressure that comes from responsibility and uncertainty, actually accelerates the development of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, impulse control, and long-term decision-making. In other words, the brain builds strength the same way muscle does, not through comfort, through resistance. Gen X kids were doing their own laundry at 9, navigating conflict with siblings without a parent referee, figuring out dinner because nobody else was going to figure it out. Every single one of those moments was a micro-stress event that the brain processed, adapted to, and filed away as solved. By the time a Gen X kid was 16, their nervous system had already run thousands of these simulations, real ones, with real consequences. That's not neglect creating damage. That's pressure creating diamonds.
But the training didn't stop at empty houses. Generation X came of age during one of the most institutionally dishonest periods in modern American history. They were children during Watergate. They watched a president resign on television. They grew up hearing about Iran-Contra. They saw the AIDS crisis get ignored by the people in charge for years while people died. They watched their fathers work 30 years for companies that then downsized them out the door without a second thought. Every authority figure that was supposed to be trustworthy wasn't. And here's what that does to a developing psyche. It doesn't break trust completely. It calibrates it. Psychologists call this earned trust versus assumed trust. Most generations grow up with assumed trust. You trust authority figures until they prove otherwise. Gen X skipped that entirely. They came out the other side requiring proof first. Dr. Jean Twenge, who has spent years researching generational psychology, noted that Gen X showed uniquely low institutional trust compared to both the boomers before them and millennials after. But paradoxically, higher interpersonal loyalty. They didn't trust systems, but they were fiercely, almost irrationally loyal to the specific individuals who proved themselves worthy. That's not cynicism. That's wisdom that most people don't develop until they're 60. Gen X had it at 25.
Now let's talk about something that gets misread constantly. People look at Generation X and see detachment. They see the dry humor, the eye roll, the refusal to perform enthusiasm. They see people who don't hype themselves up on LinkedIn, don't post motivational quotes at 6 a.m., don't talk about their feelings in meetings. And the assumption, especially from younger generations, is that they're emotionally closed off, repressed, maybe a little dead inside. That reading is completely wrong. What looks like emotional detachment is actually something researchers call affect regulation, the ability to experience emotion without being controlled by it, to feel the fear and keep moving, to feel the grief and still show up tomorrow. Dr. James Gross at Stanford University has published extensively on emotion regulation strategies. His research identifies two primary approaches: cognitive reappraisal, which means reframing a situation before the emotional response fully activates, and expressive suppression, which means feeling the emotion, but choosing when and how to express it.
They're not people who don't feel things. They're people who learned, out of necessity, alone in those quiet houses, how to process things without an audience, how to sit with hard feelings without immediately needing them validated, how to let something hurt and then get up anyway. And this shows up nowhere more clearly than in how they work. There's a running joke in every workplace with mixed generations. You always know which one is Gen X because they're the ones who just do the thing. No 30-minute meeting to discuss the meeting, no collaborative brainstorm session about the brainstorm, no check-in about how everyone's feeling about the project before the project starts. They just do it. This work ethic was built the old way. Paper routes at 5 a.m. in January, grocery bagging jobs at 14 where you were expected to perform or get replaced, fast food counters where the register broke and you calculated change in your head because a line of people was waiting, and that was simply the job.
Dr. Angela Duckworth's research on grit, the combination of passion and perseverance that predicts long-term achievement better than talent or intelligence, consistently points to one origin: repeated experience of effort leading to outcome. Not participation trophies, not encouragement, actual cause and effect, over and over, until your nervous system believes that what you do matters. Generation X lived inside that feedback loop for their entire childhood. Here's the part that deserves to be said directly. The world right now has a complicated relationship with strength. We pathologize toughness. We treat stoicism as a red flag. But something got lost in that shift. The understanding that some people carry hard things quietly, not because they're suppressing and suffering, but because they genuinely processed it. They sat alone with it. They made peace with it. And they moved forward without needing a ceremony around it.
That's not trauma. That's maturity. And Generation X has it in abundance. There's a concept in psychology called post-traumatic growth. The idea that some people don't just recover from difficulty, they actually develop beyond where they were before. Researchers Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, who developed the framework at UNC Charlotte, found that post-traumatic growth most commonly produces 5 outcomes: personal strength, new possibilities, relating to others, appreciation for life, and spiritual or existential change. Walk through that list and ask yourself, does any generation embody it more completely than Gen X? They know their own strength because they've tested it. They created possibilities because nobody handed them a roadmap.
Look around your office, your neighborhood, your family. The Gen X person in your life isn't the one loudly announcing their resilience. They're the one who already fixed the thing that was broken before anyone noticed it was broken. They're the one who shows up when it matters, without being asked. They're the one who never needs a round of applause. Because somewhere around age 9, in a quiet house with a key around their neck, they stopped waiting for one. That kid who came home alone to an empty house didn't get weaker in that silence. They got forged. And here's what nobody understood at the time, what maybe even they didn't understand. All of that aloneness, all of that early wait, all of those consequences handled without a safety net, it wasn't building a person who would go through life surviving. It was building a person who would go through life unbreakable. Not because nothing hurt them, but because they learned, earlier than anyone should have to, that you can be hurt and still be whole, that you can lose and still keep going, that you can stand in an empty house at 8 years old, make yourself a sandwich, do your homework, and decide, quietly, without any applause, that you are going to be okay.
And they were. And they are. Generation X was never soft. That's exactly why nothing could break them. If this hit different for you, subscribe. And if you want to go deeper on the psychology of generations, strength, and identity, the join button is right there. These conversations are worth having.